أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. Today, inshallah, we're talking about i'tikaf. I'tikaf in the fiqh books is presented after Sawm. Reason being is the i'tikaf that most people are aware of is the i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Therefore, since we fast in Ramadan, we talk about Sawm first, and then we include i'tikaf under the umbrella of Sawm, and we talk about i'tikaf basically after we talk about fasting. So that is why spiritual retreat, which is i'tikaf, is mentioned here. Now, a spiritual retreat is to stay in a mosque in which the ritual prayer is performed with an intention of making spiritual retreat. So the intention is there, and it needs to be a mosque in which the ritual prayer is performed. So how does it explain this? A mosque with an appointed imam and caller, which is a mu'adhin, to prayer, regardless of whether the 5 prayers are held in a congregation or not. Okay, so the condition for it being a mosque is low. It doesn't have to be 5 daily prayers. It could just be it has an imam, it has a mu'adhin, and prayers are performed there. It doesn't necessarily have to be 5 daily prayers. Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. So whenever it says these 2 imams, we understand that this, the top part, is Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. So the Imamain being Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, Allah have mercy upon them, rahimahumullah, opined it is valid in every mosque. And this is deemed to be the soundest position, sahih. So this is one of those examples where, even though we call ourselves Hanafis, we have said this is Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, this is the opinion of Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. We take Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad's opinion here. It is the soundest position, not the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. So again, this is another example that we do not follow just Imam Abu Hanifa blindly. We follow whatever is the soundest position inside of the madhab. As for the Friday congregational mosque, by agreement being Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, spiritual retreat is valid therein. Even if all of the prayers are not performed in it. So what is the difference in opinion here, if it wasn't open, if it wasn't explicit for you, is Imam Abu Hanifa is saying that there needs to be ritual prayer performed in the mosque. Okay, it can't just be an empty mosque. It needs to be an active mosque. But what Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad are saying is, even if it's a derelict mosque, as long as it's a mosque, so somebody one time has given it in the path of Allah, but nobody uses it, but it's just sitting there, it's still a mosque, right? Even if it doesn't have an imam, the prayers aren't performed in there, nobody might not go there, but as long as it is a mosque for them, that's enough. So you can do i'tikaf inside of there. But for Imam Abu Hanifa, it needs to be an active mosque. Even if it's not 5 times a day, it needs to have some congregational prayer done within it. If it's a Friday congregational mosque, then by agreement of all of them, it is done. Why? Because for it to be a Friday mosque, there were other conditions which we already spoke about in the subject of Friday prayer. A woman performs the spiritual retreat in her prayer room. Okay, so in general, how a Muslim's house should be set up is everyone has their bedrooms, so the mother, father, the kids, and one room in the house is normally the prayer room. Okay, so normally nobody enters there except when they have wudu and they're going to pray, and it's kept clean, and there might be a Quran and some tasbihs and things like that. So normally that's how a Muslim's house should be set up. However, houses nowadays are a lot smaller than they used to be. So, you know, not everybody has even bedrooms, let alone a separate prayer room. So we're going to get to that. What happens if you don't have a prayer room in the house? Okay, the place she has specified for obligatory and nafila prayers in her house. Now, it is recommended for a woman to specify a place in the house for her prayers. Okay, so instead of just having your sajjada, your prayer mat, and praying wherever, you should, as a lady, specify a place in your house. This is the place I pray. Okay, this is recommended. And for men to do the same for nafila prayers. So men too, you should have a place in your house, okay, where this is where I pray all of my nafila prayers. Okay. As for obligatory prayers and spiritual retreat, men perform them in the mosque. So we shouldn't be praying fard salah at home. We should be praying that in the mosque. Now, this is what we said, recommended. So if you can, you can. If you can't, then it's not a problem. A woman may not perform spiritual retreat without the permission of her husband. Why? This is the same as with fasting, because she needs to be available for her husband. However, and this is a bit funny, if he permits her, then he cannot have sexual intercourse with her, as he does not have the right to retract permission. So if you give permission, you're not allowed to retract it. Okay, so no takebacks. It is disliked for a woman to perform spiritual retreat in a mosque. What did we say? Where should she do it? At home, in her prayer room. Her spiritual retreat is not valid. So what does it mean? It's disliked. Many have said it's tanzihan makruh, but it's still valid. However, if something's makruh, then, and it's nafila, is there any point in doing it? Is the question that would be asked. So what we say is by it's valid is if she had, for example, vowed that she's going to do a spiritual retreat and she does it in the mosque, then she would have done the vow. So she's not punished for not doing a vow, basically, but it would be makruh, is where we would say. Now, is what we would say. But her spiritual retreat is not valid in another place in the house other than her designated prayer area. Just as it is not valid in the house if it does not have a designated prayer area. So if your house doesn't have a designated prayer area, then you cannot do i'tikaf in the house because there's nowhere for you to stay. But what does the author say? My liege lord and father, who is Ibn Abidin, the father is Ibn Abidin, rahmatullahi alayhi, said, it ought to be valid if she designated this place for prayer upon intending to perform spiritual retreat, which means that normally your house might not have a place, okay, for prayer. Normally you just have a prayer mat and you pray wherever you want, most likely in the living room or in a corner in your bedroom or something. But if you're going to intend, if a lady is going to intend to pray, to do i'tikaf, then what she can do is she can designate a place as a prayer place there and then. So she can say, okay, this is my prayer room now. Now I'm doing intention for i'tikaf. A woman may not leave her house when she's performing spiritual retreat in it, obviously, because that's the whole point of spiritual retreat, is to not leave. Same for men in the mosque. It is a condition for the lawfulness of the spiritual retreat that one is free from major ritual impurity, menstruation, and postnatal lochia. Okay, but it doesn't say the sihha, the validity. It says the lawfulness. Now, there is a difference. Lawfulness means not whether it's accepted or not, whether it's halal or not. Okay, so because normally where is spiritual retreat done? In the mosque. When I say normally, it has to be done in a mosque. We're talking about men here. So therefore, if it's done in a mosque, then major ritual impurity is haram, because you cannot be in a mosque if you have major ritual impurity. You need to get a ghusl, then enter the mosque. You're not allowed to enter the mosque if you don't have ghusl. Okay, so it would be haram in that sense. However, the i'tikaf would be sihha, okay, valid. Why? Because the i'tikaf doesn't require a fast, and it doesn't require anything other than just staying in the mosque. That is if the i'tikaf is not vowed. If the i'tikaf is vowed, then a fast must accompany the i'tikaf. Okay, so there's two different i'tikafs. There's a vowed i'tikaf and there's a non-vowed i'tikaf. If the i'tikaf is vowed, then it must be accompanied by fasting. If it is not vowed, then it does not have to be accompanied by fasting. So, coming back to the lawfulness of the spiritual retreat, you need to make sure major ritual impurity, menstruation, and postnatal lochia, okay? These are not, like, you don't have these when you're doing i'tikaf. The essence of spiritual retreat is staying in a mosque, okay? As for the validity of a vowed spiritual retreat, it is a condition that there is an intention from a sane Muslim who is free from menstruation and postnatal lochia. Why? Because they have to also fast. So that's where the validity comes in, okay? It is a condition for the lawfulness of the vowed spiritual retreat that one is free from menstruation, postnatal lochia, and major ritual impurity. Why? What's the difference? We already said menstruation and postnatal lochia, but we didn't say major ritual impurity in the vowed one. Why? Because major ritual impurity isn't necessary. Sorry, you don't need to have ghusl to fast, but you do need to not be in a state of haid or nifas. So because you don't need ghusl to fast, we say that the lawfulness of the vowed spiritual retreat, we say that the sihha doesn't have major ritual impurity, but that doesn't mean you can still stay in a mosque without major ritual impurity. It would be haram. The lawfulness wouldn't be there, but the sihha would be there, which means that the vow, as long as you fasted and done the i'tikaf, the vow would have been completed. However, you would be sinful for staying in a mosque without ghusl. Okay, so realistically, how would this ever happen? Okay, realistically, this would happen like this. A person, he does a vow to do i'tikaf. And because he's done a vow to do i'tikaf, he has to go to the masjid at night time, just like when you're fasting, at night time. And he needs to do intention to fast the next day, and he needs to do intention to stay in i'tikaf. So the next day, he fasts, he does his i'tikaf, and then he comes home. And then let's say he later on realized that he didn't have ghusl. So because he's vowed that day to fast, is his vow broken or not? We say his vow is valid, right? It's been done. Why? Because the i'tikaf requires fasting and staying in the mosque, and he's done both. You don't need ritual impurity to fast. Neither do you need it specifically for i'tikaf, even though it's haram without it. But specifically, i'tikaf only requires you to just stay in a mosque. So because of this, we say it's valid, the vow would be valid, but obviously staying in the mosque without ritual impurity, haram. Now, there are three types of spiritual retreat. A mandatory one, a communally emphasized sunnah one, and a recommended one. Okay, so the mandatory is a vow. The communal emphasized sunnah is the one in the last 10 days of Ramadan. So it's communally emphasized sunnah. So it's sunnah mu'akkada, not umumi. I forgot what we called it. Kifaya, sorry. Sunnah mu'akkada kifaya. Kifayatan. So the kifaya is, as long as one person does it, no one else has to do it. Okay, they can obviously do it, but no one else has to do it. And then the recommended one, which is neither of these, is just you can do it any day outside of the last 10 days of Ramadan, whenever you want. Okay, so the mandatory one is due to a verbal vow to perform the spiritual retreat. An intention alone does not make the spiritual retreat mandatory. Okay, so just having the intention to do i'tikaf does not make that i'tikaf mandatory for you. Okay, the vow may be conditional or non-conditional. So the vow may be something like, if this happens, then I'm going to. Or non-conditional, just saying, I am going to, or I vow to do such and such. So that would be a vow. Non-conditional, and the conditional one would be, if this happens, then I will, or I vow to. The communal emphasized sunnah is the last 10 days of Ramadan. And the recommended outside the last 10 days of Ramadan, the minimal supererogatory spiritual retreat may be even for a short period of time, even for a couple of seconds. Even if one is passing through the mosque, and even if it is during the night. This is a stratagem, hila, for the one who wishes to enter the mosque and leave from another door immediately, so that he is not making the mosque a pathway, as this is not permissible. You're not allowed to use the mosque as a pathway. So for someone who's going to do that, the least they can do is before entering the mosque, they make intention for nafila i'tikaf, and they leave through the other door. That way it's a hila. Whether, in the day of judgment you'll be asked about it or not, that's another question. But fiqhan, it's fine. Fasting is a condition for the validity of the vowed spiritual retreat, but not a recommended retreat. Okay, so if you vow a spiritual retreat, so if you vow an i'tikaf, you have to also fast. It is unlawful for the one performing a mandatory spiritual retreat, so a vowed one, to exit the place of the retreat. Okay, for the woman, this is the designated prayer room in her house. Unless it is for, so there are reasons where you're allowed to, a human need, such as to urinate, defecate, or to perform the purificatory bath after a wet dream. Why doesn't it not say intercourse here? Because intercourse breaks the i'tikaf anyways. And it is not permissible, and it is not possible to bathe in the mosque. So if it's not possible to do this stuff in the mosque, then you may leave the mosque. Okay. However, one should not stay outside the mosque after attaining purity. So after you've done ghusl, you can't then head home, have some food, then come to the mosque. No, you need to go get your ghusl and head straight back to the mosque. 2, a need based in sacred law. Okay, so this was a human need and a shari'i need, such as the Friday prayer. So let's say you're in a mosque where the Friday prayer is not prayed. Obviously, you're going to have to leave for Friday prayer. And he leaves the mosque at a time when it is possible to catch the Friday prayer and its associated sunnah prayers. Not longer though. So if Friday prayer is at 1 p.m., you may leave early enough that you get there so that you can pray your 4 sunnahs before the Friday prayer and then listen to the khutbah. Okay, what you don't do is, if it's at 1 p.m., you don't arrive at the mosque at 10 a.m. If one stays in the Friday congregational mosque for longer or completes the spiritual retreat therein, it is valid, but somewhat disliked. Okay, so wherever you've done intention to do i'tikaf, you should stay there. Similarly, he may leave to perform the call to prayer if he's the mu'adhin, even if he is not the appointed caller, even if he's not the mu'adhin, to prayer, and the door to the minara is outside the mosque. So normally in the olden times they would climb up the minara. So if the door to it is outside the mosque, you may leave the mosque, go up the minara, do the adhan, even if you're not the mu'adhin, and then come back down. When we say you're not the mu'adhin, anyone who reads the adhan is the mu'adhin. We're talking about the appointed mu'adhin. and you come back down and you enter the mosque again. You don't hang about. The third, okay, the third thing which allows you to leave the mosque or your prayer area for ladies, a need based on an emergency such as the destruction of the mosque, forceful expulsion by an oppressor, and fear for one's life or goods from attackers, and therefore one enters another mosque. Okay, so for some reason that mosque is under attack, you may leave to go to another mosque. So one must leave only with the intention of entering another mosque and directly go to it without becoming preoccupied with anything else. Unless there is jihad, obviously, then you get occupied with jihad. If one exits the mosque for a moment without a valid excuse, even if it is forgetfully, the mandatory spiritual retreat becomes invalid. Why doesn't the other ones become invalid? Because they become complete, right? And the other types of spiritual retreat come to an end. Okay, so the mandatory ones becomes invalid, which means your vow has not been done. Okay, the other ones, you do the intention for 10 days of Ramadan, you left accidentally on the 5th day or forgetfully on the fifth day, it comes to an end. So it doesn't mean that your 5 days were invalid, it just means that it's come to an end. Right? The nafila one, we already said it can be for a couple of seconds anyways. So whenever you leave the mosque, forgetfully, on purpose, whatever, it ends then. And you can just make another intention and go back in. The mandatory spiritual retreat is made up, except if it was invalidated, na'udhu billah, by apostasy. Okay? So that's because anyone who leaves the fold of Islam, any obligations fall away from them anyways. May Allah protect us all from that. But if a wajib one, a vowed i'tikaf, is nullified, invalidated, you must make it up. If one leaves the mosque due to one of the aforementioned excuses, okay. So let's just get back to that. So a question may be asked, okay, I made intention for the 10 days of Ramadan, but I left on the 5th day. Do I have to make up the rest of the 5 days? Do I have to make up a whole 10 days? We say no, because it's not invalid, it has just come to an end. It's like giving salam at the nafila salah after at-tahiyyatu. You may have made intention for 4, but if you give salam at the end of 2, you don't have to do qada of the other 2 rakats. Okay, so you've just put it to an end. That's where you're supposed to do it. So invalidity and it coming to an end are 2 different things. So if somebody leaves the mosque and they've done intention for the 10 days of Ramadan, they don't owe anything. If one leaves the mosque due to one of the aforementioned excuses, the human need, the shari'i need, or an emergency that occur frequently, okay, the spiritual retreat is not invalidated. Okay, if it's something that occurs frequently, which is what? The Friday prayer that happens every single week, right? Human need being urinating, defecating, and whatnot, or having to go get ghusl. This is normal. It's all normal things, right? The things that don't occur frequently, okay, jihad. As for those that do not occur frequently, for example, rescuing a drowning person, the destruction of the mosque, those sitting spiritual retreat in the mosque disperse, such as the performance of the congregational prayer ceases. Remember we said that the congregational prayer needs to be done at the mosque for it to be valid. Let's say everybody left, so there's no more congregational prayer in that mosque, then you have to also leave. And jihad, where there is a general call to arms. So if you're being called to jihad, and so what happens, these excuses remove the sin of leaving the spiritual retreat, but do not stop it from becoming invalid. They also invalidate it. Okay, why? Because these are very unnatural things. So it's not a difficult fatwa to say it's invalid. But for things which happen all the time, for someone needs to go to the toilet, how can you ever say that this person's i'tikaf is invalid? You can't. So we said a jihad where there is a general call to arms. How does a general call to arms work in Islam? Usually, in Islam, the mu'adhin, right, the callers to prayer are not only the callers to prayer. the mu'adhins are also the callers to war. So if many people don't know this, I didn't know this either until what happened in Turkey. If the salah, as in salat and salam on the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is read from the minaras of a mosque, this is calling everyone to attention. Okay, they use this as calling everyone to attention that something has happened. Okay, and people should gather. So it's a call to gather. The reason they don't read the adhan is the call for prayer. So you can't read the adhan for anything else. But you can do salat and salam on the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam for anything, right? So if you can't read the adhan, what's the next best thing? To read salat. So salat and salam will be read from the minaras, and every man that hears the salat and salam being read from the minaras should get up, say goodbye to their family, kiss the wife and kids goodbye, and leave, and go to the mosque and figure out what's going on, because it may be jihad, it may be something else. It may be a janazah, but either way, the mosque is calling you to come. So you need to get up, say goodbye to the family, and leave. And if it is jihad, then you'll get your orders from wherever you get your orders from. If you want an example of this happening, this happened in Turkey when there was a coup attempt. I can pull that up for everybody here so we can look at it together. So if we do this and this, and I mute myself and unmute. So that was the salah that was read. This was just one mosque that read it in Turkey during the coup attempt. So when you hear a salah like this, what the man should do is get up and leave. What the lady should do is get the man to get up and leave. Because there is a need. The mosque doesn't randomly call people to gather unless there's something very important going on. So if you're in i'tikaf and you start hearing these salahs, then you need to understand that something has happened. And it may be a jihad that you may have to actually leave the i'tikaf and go. Now, the eating, drinking, sleeping, and commercial transactions for that which he needs, okay, for himself or his family must be in the mosque. However, it is disliked, okay, this is prohibitively disliked, even if the transaction is being performed due to need, okay? So it's tahriman makruh to bring goods into the mosque, okay? So the eating, drinking, sleeping, and commercial transactions for that which he needs for himself or his family must be in the mosque. So the best case scenario is you gather some money before you go to i'tikaf so that you don't have to do trade during i'tikaf. But for your i'tikaf to be valid, obviously, basically what it's saying is you cannot leave for commercial transaction. So you cannot say, I'm going to do i'tikaf, for example. Somebody might say, I'm going to do i'tikaf for a whole month, but he leaves to go to his job. That's not allowed. Okay. Now, this is also important. Here it says, another important ruling concerning the spiritual retreat is excessive talking. It is tahriman makruh, prohibitively disliked, to remain silent during the spiritual retreat if one deems silence itself to be an act of worship. Okay, so you should not be completely silent if you believe it's an act of worship. If you're being silent because there's no need to talk, that's fine. Otherwise, one should not speak other than good speech which is free from sin. Okay, good includes speech which is merely permissible if there is a need for it. Without a need, one should not speak. And this is the meaning of the words in Fath al-Qadir, that it is disliked to talk in the mosque, and it consumes good deeds as fire consumes dry wood. Others explain that there is no impropriety in talking in the mosque if it is minimal. However, it is tahrim and makruh if one intended going to the mosque for the purposes of talking. So let's say you're bored, your friends are all in the mosque, so you decided to go there for a chat. This is tahrim and makruh. Okay, so what did we say? Not talking, tahrim and makruh, if you believe it's part of the worship. Okay, otherwise you're only supposed to talk about good things, necessary talk, and talk about Allah and fiqh and ilm and whatnot. Now, the i'tikaf, the spiritual retreat, is invalidated by 1. Deliberate or forgetful intercourse. Okay, even if it's outside the mosque during the night. So being forgetful, it's not like fasting where doing anything forgetfully is is fine. No, even if it's forgetful, it's finished. Similarly, ejaculation due to foreplay, it's ruins the i'tikaf. 3, na'udhu billah, apostasy. But this is not made up later on. Why? Because we said all the obligations fall away from a non-Muslim anyways. 4, unconsciousness and insanity if they persist for a period of time that leads him to miss the fast, as he is unable to form an intention. Okay, what did we say that was? From sunset all the way to almost the middle of the day, that was for Ramadan. But for a vowed fast, if he's vowed for a specific day, again, just like Ramadan, he's got almost until the middle of the day. But if it was just a randomly vowed fast, what did we say? Because he didn't specify that day, he needs to do the intention at night time before Fajr. So if he were to faint before Maghrib all the way until Fajr time for a fast like this, then he also wouldn't be able to do i'tikaf. A verbal vow to perform spiritual retreat for a number of consecutive days necessitates remaining in retreat during the accompanying night. So if a person said a whole month, a week, 3 days, it doesn't matter how much, he has to stay at night time too. It's not just the days. This isn't fasting. This is i'tikaf. Right? You have to stay the nights also. This applies even if one did not stipulate consecutiveness as a condition. Be very careful. Even if you say 3 days, i'tikaf for 3 days, but you never said one after the other, it doesn't matter. You have to do it one after the other. Okay? The opposite is also true. That is, if one vows spiritual retreat for a number of nights, the days are also incumbent. Okay? So if you said, I'm going to stay in the mosque for 3 nights, you must also stay the days. If you say for 3 days, you must also stay the nights. And it has to be consecutive, whether you said consecutive or not. That's why we don't recommend vowing anything. If one vowed to perform spiritual retreat in an unspecified month, it is incumbent to perform it for a month in any month with consecutive nights and days. Okay? In contrast, if he vows to fast for a month and does not mention or intend consecutiveness, he has a choice. So fasting is not the same as i'tikaf. If you vow to fast for a month, you can do it one after the other consecutively, or you can do it whenever you want, just as long as it ends up being 30 days. But for i'tikaf, you have to do it consecutively, so you need to be careful. If he wishes, he separates the fasts or he fasts consecutively. Now, that is i'tikaf over. Now we're talking about vows, what we call nadhr with a dhal. Okay, nadhr. So, know that a vow is a legitimate act of worship and it is an act of the tongue. Okay, a vow is an act of ibadah and it is an act of ibadah that we do with the tongue, similar to what? Dhikr, similar to reading Quran. Okay, so obviously when we say similar, not the same level, but it is a worship. Fulfilling a vow is incumbent, meaning it's mandatory, wajib, okay? So fulfilling a vow is mandatory due to the words of the Quran. Let them then finish with their self-neglect and let them fulfill their vows and circumambulate the ancient house. And the words of the Prophet ﷺ narrated by Bukhari, whoever vows to obey Allah, let him obey him, and whoever vows to disobey Allah, let him not disobey. Okay, so you need to break your vow. Okay. Even if one did not intend it. Okay. So fulfilling a vow is incumbent even if one did not intend it. As long as, that's why I've been careful throughout this whole lesson to say if somebody vows, right? Because even by accident, you can make a vow. You have to be very careful. For example, if one intends to utter ordinary speech and what flows from his tongue is a vow, notice that the author isn't writing an example here. Why? Because that may be considered a vow. It is incumbent to fulfill. Okay? You'll see this also. The authors will do this in the subject of divorcing a wife. Okay? They won't put down examples saying I, because it might accidentally happen. Okay, so you'll notice that once we get there, inshallah. So, what did he say? He intended normal speech, but what flows from the tongue is a vow. It is incumbent to fulfill. So he meant to say, I'm going to do this or something, but he made it sound like a vow. Because he made it sound like a vow, he has to do it. Similarly, if one intends to say, he intended to say what? I hereby owe, and the rest of the sentence, yeah? So he's saying he owes Allah to fast a day, and instead what flows from his tongue is to fast a month. So he meant to say day, but what his tongue said is month. A month of fasting is mandatory. It says obligatory here, but mandatory, because as in matters of divorce, this includes divorce too, jesting, making a joke, has the same legal effect as seriousness. It doesn't matter if you were joking, divorcing and making vows apply. Okay? That's why we tell men that get married, the word divorce and the word talaq, completely remove them from your dictionary. They don't exist for you anymore. As a joke, laughingly, you know, don't. You remove the word talaq and divorce from your dictionary, it doesn't exist for you anymore. Vows do not fall under the jurisdiction of a judge as they do not enter into legal matters. So, a judge cannot coerce someone to fulfill a vow to emancipate a slave in his ownership. Okay, so if somebody vowed that I'm going to set free my slave, that slave cannot take him to court. Why? Because it's not a legal matter. Rather, one has a personal duty to fulfill the vow and neglecting it is a sin. However, the judge cannot force him to do it. Okay, so what did we say? A vow is wajib, even if it's by accident or by joking. Okay, accident being you meant to say one day, you accidentally said a month. You meant to say a month, you said a year. Okay, it becomes mandatory. Okay, and we also said it's not a legal matter, so therefore the judge cannot rule it. So he cannot force you to do it. Conditions for the validity of a vow. Now, for it to be a vow, there are also conditions. Okay, the following are the conditions for the validity of a vow. The vow act is not in itself a sin. So you cannot say, for example, I vow to, no, like you can't, someone can't say they vow to drink alcohol. Or no element of it is an act of worship. Okay. So if none of it is an act of worship, it's not a proper vow. You don't have to do it. For example, if someone were to say, you know, if this such and such happens, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. That's not an ibadah. That's not an act of worship. Therefore, you don't have to do it. Okay. Therefore, a vow to fast on the day of sacrifice, for example. So, what did we say? The act is not in itself a sin, or absolutely none of it is worship. So if somebody vows to fast on the day of sacrifice, let's break this down. Fasting, is it a worship or not? Yes, it is. Now, is it haram to fast on the day of sacrifice? Is it a sin? It is a sin. However, fasting in and of itself is not a sin. Okay? So fasting on that day is a sin, but fasting is not a sin. Therefore, this vow is valid, as fasting itself is not a sin, but to fast on this day is. So it's haram li ghayrihi. It's a sin not because of itself, but because of an outside factor. It is therefore mandatory to fulfill the vow by fasting on another day. So you have to fulfill the vow, but not on that day because it's a sin, on another day. If one vows to perform 2 units of prayer without being in a state of ritual purity, so without wudu, or without reciting the Quran, so what's the vow? 2 units of prayer. Is it a worship? Yes. Is it haram? No. Is it haram to do it without wudu? Of course. Is it haram to do it without Quran? Yes, because reading Quran in salah is fard. One must perform the 2 units in a state of wudu, and he must also recite the Quran. So the vow happens, but obviously he's not allowed to do any of the sins. If the vow is attached to a sin, for example, the saying, someone might say they owe Allah to kill so-and-so. It is an oath, which is not a vow. 2 different things. An oath and a vow are 2 different things. Okay, so this is an oath, is what we call the yameen. That must be broken and the expiation is paid. So not only is it a sin, right? So you've said that you're going to, now it'll be like kill such and such person. You must not do it. Okay, and because you didn't do it, you must do kafara for breaking a yameen, an oath. The kafara. Now 2, the second condition is for the vow to be valid, yeah? The vowed act is not a current or future obligation. For example, one vows to fast or pray something that is already mandatory upon one, or will be mandatory in the future anyways. So you can't say, I'm going to, if this happens, I'm going to fast in Ramadan. It's already fard for you to fast in Ramadan. This vow is just nullified. It doesn't exist. An act whose foundation in itself is of a class that includes an obligatory or mandatory act of worship like fasting, hajj, and others. Okay, so an act whose foundation in itself is of a class that includes an obligatory or mandatory act of worship, okay, if it is not from a class that includes an obligatory or mandatory act of worship, then it is not incumbent upon the one who made the vow. Okay, so it must be a worship, and it must be a worship which has in and of itself a mandatory or obligatory act of that worship. For example, getting wudu is an act of worship, yes, but it's not in and of itself a mandatory or obligatory act. It's mandatory obligatory because of salah. Otherwise, in and of itself, it's not mandatory or obligatory. However, you can say, I'm going to pray. You can say, I'm going to fast. Why? Because there is a fard prayer or an obligatory prayer, and there is a fard sawm, fast, and an obligatory fast. Okay? But, for example, other things, and it's going to give examples here. For example, visiting the sick. That's a worship, yes? Escorting the deceased to the final resting place, it's a worship. Entering a mosque, even if it's the mosque of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina, Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, or Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. These three things, they're all worships, but they're not obligatory or fard at any stage. Okay? The act is in itself, and not due to something else, a desired act of worship. Okay? For example, wudu, purificatory bath, entering a mosque, touching the Quran, the call to prayer, visiting the sick, shrouding the deceased, and following the funeral to the resting place, erecting Sufi lodges, also called zawiyas. In Turkish, we call them dergahs, and mosques, and so on. Although these are acts of worship and obedience, they are not desired per se. Okay? What does that mean? For example, wudu in and of itself is a worship, yes, but the only reason it's desired is because of salah. Otherwise, we wouldn't get wudu. Same for ghusl, same for entering a mosque. Entering a mosque is a good thing. You should be in the mosque, but the whole reason for going to the mosque is to pray. So it's not in and of itself the desired act. Touching the Quran, it's a good thing. But the only reason you're touching the Quran is to read the Quran. So the desired act is the reading of the Quran. Call to prayer, you don't read adhan just for the sake of reading the adhan. You read adhan so that you pray. Visiting the sick, okay? So you don't visit the sick simply for the visit. You do it why? By visiting the sick, you're respecting a person. You're honoring a person. So it's not the visiting itself. It's the honoring of another Muslim individual and helping another Muslim individual out and giving them nasiha and doing dua for them and everything that goes on in the visit, which is desired, not the walking to there or sitting there. And so on and so forth. So these are good acts, but they're not the desired acts. Okay? So what have we left? We've got salah, we've got fasting, we've got sadaqah left, for example. We've got hajj left. So these can be vowed. Yeah, the vow does not make incumbent more than that which one owns, or it is someone else's worship. I also forgot to include the qurbani, sacrificing an animal. Why? Because that is also obligatory in the Hanafi madhab. So therefore we are allowed to vow sacrifices. Yeah. The vow does not make it incumbent more than that which one owns, or it is someone else's ownership. Therefore, if, for example, one vows to give 1,000 dirhams in charity, but only owns 100, only 100 is incumbent. Okay? So, if you vow to give £1 million, you only have to give as much as you have. Not as much as you can afford, as much as you have. So you have to give all of your wealth. But you don't have to give 1 million. Its existence is not impossible. Okay, so the vow needs to be something possible, right? Such that if one vows to fast or enter i'tikaf yesterday, impossible, right? The vow is invalid. Similarly, if she vows to fast the days of her menstrual period, it is also invalid. It's impossible, shar'an. Okay? Whoever makes a general vow that is not conditional upon the occurrence of something. Okay, so there's no condition, it's just a vow. For example, someone says they hereby owe Allah to fast for a year, or it is conditional. Okay, so conditional or not, upon something and that event occurs. Okay, so if it's conditional, the event has to happen, right? Otherwise, what's the point of the condition? Yeah. For example, if Allah Most High heals their sick and the person is then healed, yeah, the one who made the vow must fulfill it. Okay, so if it's a non-conditional, you have to fulfill it. If it's conditional, you have to fulfill it if the condition is met. This may be a vow to fast, perform a prayer, give in charity, establish an appropriation, waqf, to give something in waqf, right? Waqf means that you gift it to Allah Jalla Jalaluh. So it's no longer in your possession. It is one opinion. Another opinion is that you give it to the use of Muslims and you may later on take it back. There is an opinion that says that. Okay, so let's read 223. According to Abu Hanifa, a waqf is the appropriation of a particular thing in such a way that the appropriator's right in it shall continue. So Imam Abu Hanifa says that you still have a right to what you have given as a waqf, and the benefits go to some charitable purpose in the manner of a loan. So it's like giving it as a loan. So if you put a Quran in the mosque, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, right, and you write on it to waqf, that Quran is still yours. It belongs to you, but you have put it in the mosque for people to read. Okay? Since the appropriation is like a loan, it is not of an absolute nature, and the appropriator is at a liberty to resume assuming the benefits or to sell or gift it. Okay? So Imam Abu Hanifa says you're allowed to take that Quran back, sell it, gift it, do whatever you want with it, basically. It's yours. Now, in contrast, the two companions, which are Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, rahimahumullah, opine that the appropriation of a particular article, right, that could be a chair, it could be a Quran, it could be a carpet, right, means that it becomes the ownership of Allah Most High, not the beneficiaries. And consequently, not the beneficiaries is an important point. And consequently, right, the rights of the appropriator cannot be resumed, and he cannot dispose, you can't get rid of it, you cannot gift it, and you cannot sell it. Okay? So there is a difference in opinion here. But even in the difference of opinion, right, it never becomes the owner of the beneficiaries. So neither here, it's still yours, and even here, you gift it to the mosque, it doesn't become the mosque's, it becomes Allah's, right? However, as with everything that has been given as a waqf, somebody will be in charge of its affairs, which means whoever runs the mosque may gather all these books which have been given in waqf, and he may decide that we're going to sell these and we're going to use the money for the mosque. That is up to him because he's the one running the place, right? As long as he doesn't put that money in his own pocket, he's allowed to get rid of things. Everything has to be done within reason, though. He can't just randomly start giving away the mosque's things or start selling them for no reason. There needs to be a reason. For example, what happens usually, as time goes on in a mosque, people put one Quran, two Qurans, they put a book, they give all of these things as waqf, and before you know it, the masjid is full of random books which no one's reading. And it's all messy and they're all over the place and all of the shelves are filled up. So the person that's running this mosque may decide, okay, we're going to get all of these books. We're going to either burn them, we're going to bury them, because you don't know whether the book is a good book or not a book, or not a good book. So he may decide that he's just going to bury all of it. That's up to him if it's going to be in the maslahah, right? In the benefit of the mosque, right? So it doesn't benefit anyone to have all of these shelves filled with random books scattered all over the place. Now, so that was waqf. Now, spiritual retreat or hajj. So what did we say? Perform a prayer, give in charity, establish a waqf, spiritual retreat or hajj. These 5 things. If the vow is conditional upon something that one wishes to occur, now, the key point being, you wish for it to happen. You want it to happen, yeah? If the vow is conditional upon something that you want to happen, it is mandatory to fulfill the vow, if that event occurs, obviously. For example, one vowed that if Allah heals the sick, then, or our absent person returns, they will perform 1,000 units of prayer. and the sick person is healed or the absent person returns, then it is necessary to perform the specified act that one has vowed. However, now pay attention here, this is interesting. If the vow was conditional upon something that one did not wish to occur, for example, if I speak to Zayd, now let's not say I, if they speak to Zayd or they drink alcohol, they owe Allah to fast for a year. Okay? And he speaks to Zayd or drinks wine, one has a choice between fasting for a year, which was the vow, and expiating for breaking an oath. So it's not a vow, it's an oath, it's a yameen. So if you make the if the condition is something that you don't want to happen, it becomes a yameen. What does a yameen do? That means you have a choice whether you can do what you said you will do, right? In this instance, it's fasting for a year. So whatever you said you will do, you can do that. Or you can just do the expiation of breaking an oath. All right. Why? Because when you say something like this that you don't want to happen, what you're actually doing is you're giving an oath to Allah that you're not going to do something, right? So if you're saying, if I speak to such and such, so you're basically giving an oath to Allah that you won't do something. And when you do that something, then you've broken your oath. So you have to do kafara, all right? Or, like we said, you have a choice. Either you do what you said you're going to do, or you do kafara. So, know that the wording of a vow may be construed to be an oath. Therefore, if one utters a vow to fast and does not intend anything, or intends a vow only, or intends that it is a vow and not an oath, in all of these cases, the utterance is a vow only. So, if your intention is to do a vow and you don't want it to be an oath, okay, then either you say vow and you don't say anything else, okay? Or you make the intention that it's only a vow. Or you make the intention that it's not an oath, okay? So I'm saying this, but it's not an oath, right? All of these cases, it will be a vow. But if one intends an oath and that it is not a vow, then it is an oath only. So even though you may have said vow, if you intended an oath, it's an oath. And expiation must be made if one does not fast, for example, or it may be something else. If one intends both a vow and an oath, so he intends both, or an oath only, and does not negate a vow, okay, so he intends it for it to be an oath, but he never said it's an oath only, not a vow, okay, then it is a vow and an oath. What does that mean? Such that if one does not fast, it is mandatory to make up the missed fast because of the vow and expiate because of the oath. Okay, so not only do you have to do qada, you have to do kafara for it. If one said, I owe a vow and did not add to that and had no specific intention, one must expiate for breaking an oath, okay? If one intended to perform fasts without specifying a number, 3 fasts are mandatory, okay? So if he says fasts, but he never says a number, it's 3, okay? And remember, if fasts don't have to be one after the other. If one intends to give charity, 10 needy people must be fed as per the charity of Eid al-Fitr. So if he says sadaqah, but he doesn't say how much, he needs to feed 10 people, just like Eid al-Fitr. Okay, sadaqat al-Fitr. As for intending, as in 10 people up to the amount of sadaqat al-Fitr. So sadaqat al-Fitr was about what? To be on the safe side, let's say £10. So you need to give about £100. Some people say £5 to be able to feed one person day and night. As for intending something specific such as Hajj, Umrah, or fasting a specific number of days, one must fulfill what was intended. So whatever you said you're going to do, you have to do what you said. Okay. Now, if the vow is conditional, what was performed before the condition is met does not suffice. So if the vow is conditional, what was performed before the condition is met does not suffice. So if someone said, if this happens, I'm going to do 5 of this, and before it happened, he's already done 2, that doesn't count. Only after the condition is met, you have to do 5. If one vowed to fast a month without specifying which month consecutively, and one fasts but omits a day, even if it's a day upon which fasting is prohibited, one must recommence the fasting from the beginning. Because why? You said consecutively. However, if one vowed to fast a specific month, one does not recommence, but the missed day alone is made up. So if he said Dhul Hijjah, actually don't say Dhul Hijjah, there's Eid al-Fitr, there's Eid al-Adha in there. If somebody said Muharram, Safar, then he misses a day in Muharram, you don't have to fast another whole month. You just have to make up the day you missed. But if he says a whole month consecutively, then he must make up the whole month consecutively. An unconditional vow to perform a spiritual retreat, Hajj, ritual, prayer, fast, and so on. So I'm trying to finish this subject, but it doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon. So we're going to get to Yameen later on. But we'll stop here, inshallah. So D9.8, an unconditional vow to perform a i'tikaf, inshallah. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.